He's the head of the bank, a giant kitten. What do you think of this video so far? Rubbish! You stupid boy. Hello everyone, it is I, Mark S.W, and welcome to part 2 of comedy shows that I like. Last week I shared with you guys 5 of my favourite comedy shows from the 60s and the 70s, and now I'm going to share with you my 5 favourite comedy shows from the 80s. Like the previous video, there's no rank order. I can only do screenshots because of copyright, hopefully, and there may be 1 or 2 spoilers. Before I begin, you guys know the drill. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when I next upload a video. So let's get started. Listen very carefully. I shall say this only once. First one I'll talk about is Allo Allo. This is the 3rd World War II comedy series made by the BBC. So I talked about Dad's Army and It Ain't Half Hot Mum. Now we have Allo Allo. Allo Allo takes place in a town called Nouvion, which is in France, which during the war was conquered by the Germans. It's all about a French cafe owner called René Artois, and he leads a very complicated and dangerous life. The French resistance, led by a woman called Michelle, are using René and his cafe to help British airmen to escape, to send messages to London, to hide explosives, and to plan sabotage. And if he doesn't cooperate, he will be shot. But of course René doesn't want any part of this because most of his cafe customers are all Germans, including a ruthless general and 2 members of the Gestapo, Herr Flick and von Smallhausen. And if they find out he's working with the resistance, well, they will shoot him. René also has to be careful around his wife Edith, who, for the record, can't sing. Because if she finds out that he's having an affair with Yvette, one of the waitresses, well, she will shoot him. And if Yvette finds out that René is seeing another girl, she will shoot him. So you can see the dangerous life René leads. But all these people have one thing in common. They're trying to get their hands on a valuable painting, The Fallen Madonna with the Big Boobies by Van Clomp. Now, Allo Allo has my favourite LGBT character, Lieutenant Gruber, a member of the tank corps, so he has a little tank. I know he's a Nazi, but he's a nice Nazi. And there are scenes where you kind of feel sorry for him. You have to go, aww. One of the main jokes in Allo Allo is that they're all speaking English, even though it takes place in France, because it's all been translated for us, but they still act like they can't speak certain languages. So when René sees the British airmen, he can't understand a word they're saying because he doesn't speak English, even though he is speaking English with a French accent. You have to watch it to understand. My next favourite 80s comedy series, Blackadder. If you're not from the UK, then you may have heard of an actor called Rowan Atkinson. He's well known for playing Mr. Bean. Well, before he did Mr. Bean, he was well known for playing Blackadder. There are 4 series and 2 specials, and each one is different because Rowan Atkinson is playing a different incarnation of Blackadder, so we're seeing his ancestral line. I think that's how you describe it. And it's not just Blackadder, he has a servant called Baldrick, who's played by Tony Robinson. Baldrick is disgusting and stupid, whereas Blackadder is devious and cunning. Mind you, Baldrick is the one who has the cunning plans, although they're not that good. In Series 1, that takes place in the 15th century, sometime after the Battle of Bosworth, and Blackadder is a prince. Series 2, he's a lord, and it's during the 16th century, so with Queen Elizabeth I. Series 3, my personal favourite, that's the Regency era. That's late 18th, early 19th century, and he's a butler working for Prince George. Then you would watch the Christmas special, which is the Victorian era, and he has a little shop. Then in Series 4, he's a captain during World War I, And then finally, there's the Millennium Special, and he's a lord again. Some of the stories in the Blackadder series are very much the same. So there's an episode where he's in love, an episode where he's jealous of someone, an episode where he's in prison, an episode where he nearly dies, and an episode where either he or one of the other main characters die. One word of warning, the last episode of Series 4, it is quite an emotional scene, a very serious moment in a comedy series. It would make you cry, so if you do watch it, make sure you have some tissues and handkerchiefs at the ready. But apart from that, it is a really funny series. I highly recommend Blackadder. And it's interesting because the series is set in the past. Now we'll look at my third favourite comedy from the 80s, which is set in the future, and that is Red Dwarf. In fact, Red Dwarf is my all-time favourite comedy series. Red Dwarf is a giant spaceship, about 5 miles long and 3 miles wide. And it's actually a mining vessel. It belongs to the Jupiter Mining Corporation. One day, a radiation leak wipes out the entire crew, leaving only 2 survivors, Dave Lister, a technician, and a complete slob. He was in suspended animation when the accident happened. And the second survivor is his pregnant cat, who was safely sealed in the ship's cargo hold. When the radiation leak happened, Holly, the ship's computer, who has an IQ of 6,000, had to move Red Dwarf out of the solar system and into deep space to avoid spreading the radiation, and Lister had to stay in stasis until the radiation had died away, which it did 3 million years later. Lister is released from stasis, and he comes to the conclusion that he may be the last human being in the universe. But he is not alone, he does have companions and friends. First there's the cat, a humanoid creature who evolved from all the cats in the cargo bay. The cat, he's selfish, vain, and has a good taste in fashion, you could say. But later in the series he does take things seriously, and he's a very good pilot. He's also well known for doing a song called Tongue Tied. It's worth watching, there's actually a music video of it. Then there's Arnold J. Rimmer. He died in the accident, but Holly brought him back as a hologram to help keep Lister sane. Lister doesn't approve of this because he doesn't like Rimmer, because he's very sensible and mature. Well, not all the time though. There are episodes where Rimmer is very silly because he wants to be an officer, mainly because he wants to boss people around. In fact, Rimmer is the one responsible for the accident on Red Dwarf. He was supposed to fix a drive plate, but he didn't fix it properly, and that's what killed the crew. And then there's Crichton. He's from another spaceship, the Nova 5. He's a Series 4000 mechanoid. A mechanoid is another name for an android. He's a sanitation droid. He does cooking, cleaning, washing, and dusting. He also cleans toilets. But when he joins the Red Dwarf crew, he becomes their acting science officer. The Red Dwarf mission now is to try and get back to Earth and see if the human race still exists. During their travels, they encounter some strange space phenomenons, rogue droids, genetically engineered life forms, and other unusual things. The best thing about Red Dwarf is that you don't have to be like a scientific genius to understand what's going on in the series. Lots of people can enjoy it. I would recommend watching it in episode order though, because some episodes sort of connect to each other. Like, I'm not going to reveal too much, but to understand the whole of Series 9, you have to watch the Series 5 episode, Back to Reality. The reason I mention this is because if you were to watch one of the later episodes, you might go, hang on, if Rimmer is a hologram, how come he can touch things? Isn't he supposed to be like a ghost? Well, that's because at some point in Series 6, he becomes a Hardlight hologram. So like I said, Red Dwarf, it's my all-time favourite comedy show, and I highly recommend watching it. So now we'll move on to the fourth comedy show that started in the 80s. This one is The Young Ones. It's about 4 college students who are big Cliff Richard fans, and, well, to put it bluntly, they have no hope. The students are Rick, who's into poetry, and he's the biggest Cliff Richard fan, and he hates fascists, i.e. Thatcher. Then there's Vivian, who's always into violence and collateral damage, Neil, a hippie, and Mike, the cool person. I mentioned in my last video the goodies that had some cartoon type humour. Well, the young ones has cartoon type humour as well, so you know, scenes that would be impossible in real life. Not only that, but there's also quite a lot of random bollocks in the series. That's the only way I can describe it. Things like talking vegetables and animals, people having very weird conversations. But one sensible thing they do have, they actually have guest bands starring in some of their episodes, like for example Madness singing Our House. I recommend this series if you're a fan of the late Rick Mayall and the still with us Adrian Edmondson, the two famous British comedians. And finally, my fifth favourite comedy from the 80s, Yes Minister, which later becomes Yes Prime Minister. The main characters are Jim Hacker, who's the Minister for the Department of Administrative Affairs and later becomes the Prime Minister, Sir Humphrey Appleby, a civil servant who's the Permanent Secretary to the DAA and later he becomes head of the Civil Service, and Bernard Woolley, the Hacker's private secretary, and he too is a civil servant, but more of a junior civil servant. He still has a lot to learn. The series is mainly about a sort of rivalry between the civil servants and the politicians. Hacker, the politician, would have an idea that would be very good and would make sense, but Humphrey would not approve of the idea, and sometimes he'll do what he can to show that it's a bad idea. Humphrey would also try and hide things from Hacker and also cut off sources of advice, usually from his political advisors. Then the only advice Hacker would get would be from Humphrey and the rest of the civil servants. But there are times where Hacker does win and he does get his way. And I recommend this comedy if you're into like maybe word type comedies. There's not much action comedy. I like this comedy because it does list some of the true points about like Brexit and the EU and also crisis situations. So those are my 5 favourite comedy shows from the 80s. Now, I know a lot of people are probably going to get cross with me because I didn't mention another comedy show called Only Fools and Horses. That's a very famous British comedy series. I think it's like #1 of all. Sorry, I know it's popular with other people, but I've only seen like a few episodes, so I don't know much about it. I do admit there are some very funny scenes in Only Fools and Horses, like play it cool, my son, play it cool. But of course the 5 I've talked about, I prefer them, they're my favourites from the 80s. So if you are an Only Fools and Horses fan and you're cross with my decision, tough. So next week I'll talk about my 5 favourite comedy shows from the 90s, which is my era because I was born in 1990. So if you've enjoyed this video about 80s comedy shows, do give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you know when I upload the 90s video. And more importantly, do check out the comedy shows I've listed, they really are good. Thanks for watching this video guys, and I'll see you next time. Over and out.